Assalamu alaikum and a very pleasant morning, girls. Yes, now we are going to see Ode to Nightingale, the remaining stanzas. In the previous class, we have seen 3 stanzas explanation, right? Yes or no, girls? Okay, in those stanzas, the first stanza describes about speaker, that is the poet's heartache, his pain. Okay, and in the second paragraph, that is second stanza, the speaker is becoming happy and expressing his feeling about Nightingale, and he want to disappear with the Nightingale in the unseen world, right? Yes or no? And in the third stanza, again he comes to the reality and says that we are not going to escape from the reality. Okay, in that paragraph, in that stanza, he says that about that is, he would like to forget the trouble which Nightingale has never known, the weariness, the fever, and the fret of human life, with its consciousness that everything is mortal and nothing lost. Youth grows pale and a spectre thin and dies. Beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes. Here in the third stanza, he says about the youth and the beauty, and he says that one day it will fade away, it will be destroyed. Okay, it will be decomposed. So everything has an end. He comes to the reality. Understood, ma? Now we are going to see the fourth stanza. Okay. Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his parts, but on the viewless wings of poesy, though the dull brain perplexes and retards. Already with thee tender is the night, and happily the queen moon is on her throne, clustered around by all her starry face. But here there is no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown, through verdurous glooms and winding mossy waves. The setting of this fourth stanza, that is the background of this fourth stanza, is Bacchus. Bacchus is a Greek god of wine and patron of theatre. Okay, also known as the liberator who would bring an end to care or worry. He would also preside over communication between the living and the dead. Okay, here in this stanza, he mentions about Bacchus. Bacchus is a Greek god who is from wine and patron, and who will bring an end to care and worry. Okay, and it is a he would also preside over communication between the living and the dead. Is it clear, ma? Okay, and he also mentions about fays. Fays is fairies. Okay, and poesy. Poesy is another name for poetry, fanciful poetry. Is that clear? Now you have understood the background of the poetry. Yes or no? That the background of that particular stanza. Here he mentions about the Bacchus, a Greek god who will end his worry and care, and who will communicate between living and the dead. And he says about the fairies. Okay, that is fays. And he says about the poesy. Poesy is another name for poetry, which is fanciful poetry. Is that clear, ma? Because he is a romantic poet, he used to write like this only. It is fanciful. Okay. Sorry, girls. Is that clear, ma? Okay. Now you will understand the fourth paragraph, because you have come to know that the background of that stanza. Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his parts. That is Bacchus, I told you, that is Greek god. Yes or no? Okay. That is the Greek god who will end his worries and cares, and who will communicate the living and the non-living. That is it clear? Okay. But on the viewless wings of poesy, I told you now itself, that is another name of poetry, that is full of fanciful poetry. Though the dull brain perplexes and retards, already with thee tender is the night, and happily the queen moon is on her throne, clustered around by all her starry face, that is the fairies. Okay, but here there is no light save what from heaven is with the breeze blown through verdurous glooms and winding mossy waves. Here in the fourth stanza, the speaker tells the nightingale to fly away, that is away, away, for I will fly to thee. Okay, the speaker tells the nightingale to fly away, and he will follow, not through alcohol, not charioted by Bacchus and his parts, but through poetry. Now, what he is telling is, he tells the nightingale to fly away, and he will follow him. That is, I will fly to thee. He will follow the nightingale, not through alcohol. That is, Bacchus is a Greek god who will bring the wine. Yes or no? So he is telling, not through the alcohol, but through poetry. That is poesy, wings of poesy. Here, how beautifully he is writing. From the wings of poesy, that is fanciful poetry, I will follow you. That is, I will fly with you. Is it clear? But through poetry, which will give him viewless wings. Viewless wings, that is unseen wings. He says he is already with the nightingale and describes the forest glade, where even the moonlight is hidden by the trees. Now he is telling that he is flying with the nightingale. Okay, and he is telling the glance of forest. Okay, even the moonlight is hidden by the trees. The moonlight is not seen because the full branches of the trees. Okay, is that clear, ma? Okay. Except the light that breaks through when the breeze blow to the branches. Okay, when we will see the light, if the breeze blows, the branches will like a pendulum, they will move, no ma? Yes or no? The trees. Yes or no? At that time we can see the light. Is that clear, ma? Have you understood that fourth stanza? That is, now Keats is turning back to imagination, as we see by the opening phrase, away, away, for I will fly to thee. But he has decided against using his spirits to reach the fantasy world. Instead, he will use poetry or poesy. In the phrase, the dull brain that perplexes and retards, and the idea that poetry is viewless, we see that he is attempting to discard logic in favor for emotions and feeling. We see that he is attempting to escape using poetry. The tone of this stanza is dark. Moonlight can also be seen as a symbol for imagination and fantasy. Moonlight can be also seen as a symbol for imagination and fantasy. Is it clear, ma? Can you get my points? Okay. Now we'll see the fifth stanza. First we will see the background, then we will read the poetic line, and after it we'll see the analysis. Okay, here the background of the fifth stanza is, here we can see that is emblemed. Emblemed is fragrant, perceived, that is a preserved body. Okay, fragrance of a preserved body. Then hawthorn, a flower that often marks that the spring has arrived. May blossom. May blossom we say no more. That is white flowers. By seeing that we can comes to know that the spring season has arrived. Okay, then eglantine, that is a rose. Okay, another name of rose. Is it clear, ma? That is, by seeing this white flower we will come to know that that is May blossom, we can say, and by seeing that we will come to know the spring season has arrived, and it is that is eglantine, a rose, that is another name for rose. Emblem is a fragrant, preserved body. Is that clear? Okay. Here in the fifth stanza, I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs, but in emblemed darkness, that is the fragrance. Okay, by that fragrance I can guess each sweet. Okay, but in emblemed darkness, guess each sweet wherewith the seasonable month endows. Okay, seasonable flowers will be there. Okay, by seeing that flower we will say this season has arrived, that season has arrived. Okay, the grass wherewith the seasonable month endows. The grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild. White hawthorn, that is the May blossom, and the pastoral eglantine. Pastoral eglantine we have seen, that is one type of rose. Okay, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child. The coming musk rose full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies and summer eves. Now, by reading those lines, you will understand clearly about what he is telling. Okay, here he is telling about that it is I cannot see the flowers. Okay, because it is very dark and the bushes and the trees has hidden, and the moonlight is not at all entering in the forest, so I can't able to see anything, but I can guess by smelling. Okay, that is emblem to dark. In the darkness also I can guess what it is, because from the fragrance, the sweet smell of the flower. Okay, and by smelling that he says that it is a seasonable month, that is the spring month has arrived, that is May blossom. And also he says that eglantine, that is the rose, as well as he says that the that is fast fading violets, that is you people have seen that flower, a violet flower which will fade very fast. Okay, is that clear, ma? Fifth stanza understood? Okay. In the fifth stanza, the speaker says that he cannot see the flowers in the glade, but can guess them in emblemed darkness. White hawthorn, eglantine, violets, and the musk rose, the murmurous haunts of flies, and summer eves. These are all the things he can guess without seeing them. Okay. By murmuring of the sound, he can guess that it is a fly. Okay. Understood, ma? Have you understood the fifth stanza? Okay. Now we'll see the sixth stanza. Okay. Darkling, I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now more than ever seems it rich to die, to seize upon the midnight with no pain. While thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad, in such an ecstasy, still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a sod. Here, in the sixth stanza, the speaker listens in the dark to the nightingale. Okay, in the dark, he is listening to the nightingale, saying that he has often been half in love with the idea of dying and called death soft names in many rhymes. Surrounded by the nightingale's song, the speaker thinks that the idea of death seems richer than ever, and he longs to seize upon the midnight with no pain. While the nightingale pours into soul ecstatically forth. If he were to die, the nightingale would continue to sing, he says, but he would have ears in vain and be no longer able to hear. That is, by following nightingale, by listening nightingale, here in the sixth stanza, the speaker listens the nightingale in the dark and says that now the idea of dying and called the that is the death is like I'm loving that, and it is a richer. Okay, the idea of death seems richer than ever. I long to die now because that nightingale singing will be heard by by his ears, and he says that if he were to die, the nightingale would continue to sing. Okay, the nightingale will sing, but he says that he would have ears in vain, that is vain, no use. Okay, because he is not able to, that is be no longer be able to hear the nightingale song. Is it clear? Okay, understood, ma? In the sixth stanza, the bird whose blissful and easy song the author has described so long is changing in the stanza. The poet, who has believed that death might free him and make him like the bird, has realized his error and knows that if he were to die, then he could never feel the bird's jubilation. That is, he will not able to hear the continuation, the song of nightingale. Okay, the bird's shift in meaning is also evident in the changing in its song. It is now requiem, a song of death, which would make its admirer the poet's assort. Okay, now the tone has changed, right? Okay, now we'll see the seventh stanza background. Here in this we see Ruth, a character from the Bible. Okay, a Moabite who, while working in the fields, was seen by Boaz, whom married her. She is referenced for her devotion to her mother-in-law after Boaz died, and she has achieved immortality for her deeds, and because her descent is David. That is, in the seventh stanza we are going to see Ruth, and this is the explanation about the Ruth. Ruth is a character from the Bible who is very devoted to her mother-in-law after the death of Boaz. Okay, she achieves immortality for her deeds, and because of her descendants is David. Is that clear? Okay. Now, the seventh stanza, that is, Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird, no hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the self same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth when sick for home. She stood in tears amid the alien corn, the same that oftentimes hath charmed magic casements opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairy lands forlorn. In the seventh stanza, the speaker tells that the nightingale that is immortal, that it was not born for death. Immortal, that is, which will remain forever and ever, which is not born for death. Is it clear? He says that the voice he hears singing has always been heard by ancient emperors and clowns, by homesick Ruth. He even says the song has often charmed open magic windows looking at over the foam of perilous seas in fairy lands forlorn. Is it clear? Understood, ma? Here, in this stanza, he says that even the homesick Ruth who hears the song of nightingale, she will become happy and joyous. Okay, and he says that the nightingale is a immortal, which is not born to die. Okay, that is, which will remain forever. After describing his own morality, Keats begins to ponder the bird's immortality. Although we know that a bird is not immortal, it is possible Keats is describing the immortality of what the bird symbolizes. The bird's song will live forever. Now we know that that is, bird will die. Yes or no? But here Keats mentioned as immortal because he symbolizes that the bird's song which will live forever. Okay, and has lived since the beginning of the time. The bird's immortality is also seen in the connectedness with nature, something that man lacks. The bird does not know it is going to die, so it is free from death, whereas men are constantly aware of it. It is also necessary to note that it might be our ability to comment and admire nature, as Keats is doing, that separate us. Also, compared to the bird's blissful life, humans are constantly hungry for immortality. Are we hungry for that joining with nature that Keats sought in the first several stanzas of the poem? That is, in this poem, he clearly tells that bird is immortal and that bird is free from death. Okay, because the man in contrast, the man knows about his death, that one day it will occur, and he keeps on being worried about it. Okay, and in compare to it, the bird is free from that, and the bird is connected with nature. Is it clear? Okay, now we'll see the last stanza. The last stanza, forlorn, the very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my sole self. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, deceiving elf. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillside, and now this buried deep. In the next valley glades, was it a vision or waking dream? fled is that music, do I wake up or sleep? This is the last stanza, girls. Okay, in this stanza, in the eighth stanza, this is full of 8 stanza is there. In the eighth stanza, the last stanza, the word forlorn tossed like a bell to restore the speaker from his preoccupation with the nightingale and back into himself. That is, comes back to his real world. Okay, because he was connected with nightingale. Okay, as the nightingale flies farther away from him, he laments that his imagination has failed him and says that he can no longer recall whether the nightingale's music was a vision or a waking dream. Now, as the nightingale flies and flies and flies far away, he laments, that is, he showing his worries that his imagination has failed him and says that he can no longer recall whether the nightingale music was a vision or a waking dream. Now that the music is gone, the speaker cannot recall whether he himself is awake or sleep. Is that clear, ma? Can you understood, ma? Okay. Here, the final stanza is the poet awakening from his musings. The bird or the deceiving elf. He resumed the guise of a real bird once more. The awakening causes the poet to also wonder whether what he has written were merely musing daydreams or had be reached that state of open-mindedness that he sought in the beginning. Has Keats benefited from his mind trip? The last stanza's tone is regretful and despairing, and it seems he feels cheated. But we may find hope. Is there the promise of future musing in and now? This buried deep in the next valley glades. Here, the immortality, that is, beyond the immortality of nature, Keats might also be commenting on the immortality of beauty, of how arts change like the moon but are constantly present. Is that clear, ma? Here we can see the inevitability of death. Even before his diagnosis of terminal tuberculosis, Keats focused on death and its inevitability in his work. Okay, before he comes to know that he's suffering, he's having the disease that is tuberculosis. Before that, we can see in his work that is the inevitability of death. For Keats, small, slow act of death occurred every day, and he chronicles these small mortal occurrences: the end of lovers' embrace, the images of on an ancient urn, the reaping of grain in autumn. All of these are not only symbols of death, but instances of it. Examples of great beauty and art also cause Keats to ponder mortality. Okay, that is, here we can see the theme Ode to Nightingale, that is mortal. He is comparing here mortal and immortal, beauty of nature or human life, and tragedy. Nightingale as a symbol of immortality. Okay, yes or no, girls? The poet gives references of mortality and immortality with the immortal nightingale and a mortal man. Is it clear? Okay, here he compares both the thing, that is mortal and immortal. He says that nightingale song is immortal and man is mortal. Okay, girls, by this your poetry is finished. That is, Ode to Nightingale has finished. Tomorrow we'll discuss some important themes and ideas about O2 Nightingale. But please do watch the video. If you have any doubts, please do ask girls. Then only I will clarify your doubts. Okay girls, take care. Bye bye. Allah Hafiz. Thank you.